Welcome to Conduct Detrimental. This is Dan Worley. I'm joined as always by my co-host Daniel Wallach. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dan. Good morning. It's been a real tumultuous week in sports law between Charles Oakley and then turning to Darrell Rivas. But today we flip the script and focus on another person with the initials DR. Would you like to give the grand introduction, Dan, for our special guest?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really honored to have Darren Ravel from ESPN with us. He's a senior writer at ESPN. He's in his second stint with ESPN. In between, he also briefly worked at, or I shouldn't say briefly, for a few years worked at CNBC, including winning an Emmy as part of his 2008 election coverage. You can see Darren just about everywhere these days, including SportsCenter, ESPN Radio, ESPN.com, and ABC News. Darren, welcome to Conduct Detrimental, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, we wanted to start in an area that I know that you love, Darren, which is Twitter. Dan and I both also are very into tweeting and spend a lot of our time on Twitter. And I think both of us, as we were preparing for this, really just gushed about how much we admire your not only the content of your tweets, but just the sheer consistency of it. And so I'm really interested if you could just walk us through an average day in the life of Darren Ravel's Twitter feed.
Well, there's certainly a plan, I can tell you that. Just because you can come up with a tweet in 2 seconds doesn't mean you should. And so my idea has always been, to try to maintain a sense of quality so that every time someone sees a tweet from me, more often than not, they're going to want to retweet it or hit the heart button. And so that's always the goal. Now I have a dual purpose, which is always what I'm doing, which is one, to kind of hit something that people want to talk about. And then there's the other purpose, which is to hit something that I need to talk about because it's my job in covering the business of sports. I would say that, the business of sports angle over the last 17 years that I've been covering it has obviously grown to the point that when there is breaking news or interesting news inside the business of sports, people now enjoy it. And so I feel like, that's something that I like, in that I'm not just trying to hit the lowest common denominator or, something that everyone else has. I'm doing the education part of it, the business of sports, and also trying to find things that are unique and have unique takes on it. Because, as we know, there's a tremendous amount of aggregators out there, which puts the pressure on me if I want to be unique and want to stand out among the crowd. So an average day, I would say, is I usually have a couple planned tweets which are based on what might be happening in the day that I've anticipated, or something to do with an anniversary, which does really well, or a picture of something. And I have my tweet deck open. And then I have a couple people who look out for me, not who work for me, but just they know what I look for. And so I'm getting between, 50 and 150 texts a day on what might be going on. I'm looking at the ESPN email, which comes in every hour and a half, as to what the news updates are. So it allows me to never be behind, and at the same time not be completely obsessed with it so that I could do other things. Because that's kind of really the goal here, which is not to overly, pay attention to Twitter, but at the same time be able to do my job, be able to write features, be able to do a couple TV hits, radio, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Darren, how early does your day start? Because this sounds like you do so much advanced preparation to sort of, get ready for the day and to not only, break, some stories and to put out fresh content before anybody else, and certainly more meaningful content. But you must get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, because
it's usually when the first kid cries. I mean, I have 3 kids under 5, so I sleep probably about 4.5 hours. If I go under 4, I'm sick. So a lot of it happens, really the night before up until midnight. And then I try to be as ready as possible in the morning. I really, I'm halfly paying attention until about 7:30, and then really when around 7:30, 8 o'clock is when I'm, sitting down and fully locked and loaded.
Yeah, what percentage would you say of your professional responsibilities are sort of dedicated towards social media, whether that's Twitter or other avenues?
I don't think it's as much as you think, actually. I mean, I'm on it, but I would say, maybe 20% of my day. I mean, I think you'd think it's more. And I think some of that has to do with, people know what I want, including, people on Twitter themselves. And so, I feel like I've trained people to be like mini sports business reporters because they know what I want, and I make it very clear that I'm going to give them credit for it. And, so, them being conduits and them helping me out, otherwise you would think I would spend 90% of my time on social media, because how do you find these things, and and a lot of the finding is happening, whether it's, some of the people who just help me out, or just people who are on Twitter who see something and know that I'm the person that can get the biggest audience, blast it out, and still give them credit.
Yeah, but Darren, I've noticed that you anticipate stories before they're able to break. Case in point, you probably put out a lot of exclusives on trademark issues. The entire world knew that the New England Patriots won the Super Bowl a little bit over a week ago, but you were the first one out of the gate to note that they were trademarking, the NFL is trademarking one for the thumb, the blitz for six. So you do a fair amount of, anticipating where stories may emerge, and you have all these vast, resources at your disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my biggest resource is I wake up every day thinking that someone's going to steal my job. So I feel like I wake up with that. I don't know if it's some sort of chip on my shoulder or something, but I do spend a lot of time searching for things, and I know you do too. I know things, you're looking at things, and when things come in. You see a lawsuit faster than other people. I think some of it for me is I mean, looking around, I have a bunch of notebooks where I'm basically looking for things that are coming up. Whether it's I have a trademark notebook where I have, these are the things that I should check. For example, I'm checking Mayweather promotions every month, because Floyd Mayweather's trademarked more things than anything else. And, and they're actually kind of comical and funny. So there's a bunch of things that are going on, whether it's, events that are coming up, or just things that are kind of proactive check-ins that become stories.
Yeah, I mean, I go through the same thing. You point that out, that we check Pacer on a regular basis for new lawsuit filings. I mean, the technology that has become available and easily accessible has just really created so much so much devotion or tools to be able to discover new things. The filing of a lawsuit is sort of my stock and trade, and of course, it does take a tremendous amount of time. I don't have anybody helping me, but I applaud how widely you cover the entire spectrum of sports business.
Yeah, that's the hard part. I mean, that's, you have to, this is how it's always been. You have to do both. You have to do what you need to do, and then you have to do what people want to hear. And I think there's more and more pressure to do what people want to hear. Maybe about 2.5 years ago, I still had a blog on ESPN, and I think one of the best moves we made is we got rid of it, because the blog was kind of a notebook that just it didn't pass the muster of something that people would click on if it were on the front page. And my focus became much more on, yes, we want the stuff that people want to read and click on, but then if it's going to be sports business, we want it to be something that is in one of those first couple links on ESPN. And so that made me look harder, took away from doing things like a notebook or a hodgepodge, and kind of had me focus on, as far as the news goes, what's the most important thing. And and I think a part of every story today, even if it is news, how you write it, how the headline is, how you put it out on social media, all in different ways, it's not really the same science, is important, because you are competing for that click, and it's harder than ever before to get that click, and then it's harder than ever before for someone to actually read 2 paragraphs in.
Darren, one of my favorite shows is Garbage Time by Katie Nolan, and I know that she does this like 100% tongue-in-cheek, but I'm just interested to hear your reaction to the first time you saw the delete your account segment.
I actually loved it. By the way, I think she does have a tremendous show. It's something that's very unique, and it's something that's different, and it does stand out. And when there was a whole thing about ESPN's worst Twitter account, and of course I was in the top 5.
I think it's a compliment, though. It really is. It's flattering.
Well, listen, you're either someone or you're no one in this world, and if people think about you, that's good. That's fine. For me, when I was part of that, one of the things that I said that I think probably took some people aback was that I know when I'm making a hokey joke, right? I mean, I've had an immature sense of humor since I was immature, and that hasn't changed. So the corn in me has not left, despite the fact that I'm 38 years old. And so I know when am I trolling people when I say the Dallas Cowboys when a Cowboys player gets hurt? No, it's not that overt, but I would say that I know that that's a horrible, horrible joke. I have a self-awareness that some people don't give me credit for. So it's fine. I mean, one of the things that social media has brought is, I have pretty much as hard of a head as you could possibly have.
Yeah, one of the most difficult things to get used to was criticism. I had a thick or thin skin relatively early on, but I always held fire. I never reacted to it, and it thickened over the course of time. And I'm kind of impervious to it. How do you deal with the negative commentary on any tweet? Do you just block it out, or do you try to engage people from time to time?
It depends. I feel like there's a whole system. It depends on whether you think sometimes it depends on how many followers the person has. Are they worth shouting back at? Are these people doing it just to bait you? I think over the past couple years, I've been lucky enough just not to have the time to engage in some of these back and forths. I see things, I look at many other things, but I think that most of the time I'm luckily moving on to something else. Now, there are some times that I'm extremely passionate about what I say, like, my recent talk about I think people should, work for free to establish themselves, which is something I've been saying for 15 years. Yet when I said it 2 weeks ago, I somehow was trending in the United States for 8 hours on Twitter, which is just, to me, was just insanity. But I think that part of social media with Donald Trump is everyone is on edge, and I feel like they feel stronger about things than they felt in the past, whatever it is, and they want to shout louder, maybe just because of the tension that's going on. I think that sometimes I'll go back and forth for that work for free thing. I went back and forth and back and forth. It turned out I just basically carved out a couple hours to just say what I need to say. And sometimes, Twitter is by its very nature out of context. And so it takes a couple tweets to kind of say what you need to say in order for it to make sense. And I felt like maybe that was one of those cases.
Yeah, Darren, your work for free, comments on Twitter really struck a chord with both me and Dan, because I think the two of us are the kings of working for free. And I wouldn't even be in this space. I'm not sure Dan would even be in this space, whatever that space is, unless we devoted hundreds of hours.
Right, you created it.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, probably first met in person at the New York Supreme Court, evidentiary hearing on that DraftKings and FanDuel, motion for a preliminary injunction to keep them out of New York. I flew up there on my own time. I was sitting next to you in the courtroom. I mean, that's just sort of an example of the devotion and the hundreds and hundreds of hours of work that the two of us put in. And I think your advice was right on the money. And I was so surprised that it struck a chord and it led to all this, controversy surrounding, being paid for your time. You have to do something like that to get ahead.
And I tried to figure out, what was the root of the anger. And I think some of it, frankly, is that, it was people thought I was, referring to journalism in specific. I was including journalism. I was including other things too, and I was including in order to get into sports, you have to. Everyone wants to work for free. I mean, everyone wants to work in sports, so you have to be able to establish yourself. You're up against the wall. You are against all odds in terms of, especially if you don't have any real contacts, which I didn't have when I started. And just by way of background, I built FoxSportsBiz.com, which I think was ahead of its time and was, basically part of FoxSports.com for a year and a half in the late 90s, when I was a student for free that, would have cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for someone to build. But that was just my way of, I didn't have a great connection and I had to build myself up. But I think some of the anger comes from the fact that some people now, specifically in journalism, are doing things that actually don't have that much value. And so if you encourage people to do it for free, then it's seen that value is not there, i.e., people who are writing game stories more than anything else, that is seen to be diminishing returns. And so, and it was referring to, the reason it got me started was because I said that, why doesn't the Sun-Times have someone, writing a Northwestern game story instead of just taking AP? And so it was specifically referring to that, to allow someone to work for free. And the truth is that writing game stories have lesser and lesser value. So I think some of the sensitivity came from some people who are frankly writing a lot of game stories. The point of working for free is at some point you establish your value so that you eventually do get paid. And people say, well, what happens if you still don't? Well, then you're working for the wrong organization and the wrong person.
Darren, do you think that that it particularly struck a chord within the journalism industry because the journalism business is changing? We see jobs being cut in the sort of traditional newspaper writing jobs and moving more towards digital, which is a different space, and maybe. I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but there's this sort of, people are on edge about what's happening to the journalism market. Do you think that was one of the reasons why it kind of struck a nerve with that crowd?
I think so. I feel like the journalism, business is certainly being challenged now. But you have to differentiate. You have to be different. And so I think the pressure to be different is greater. Again, going back to me trying to find things on Twitter, there are so many aggregators out there that, do I want to be the 10th person who put together a couple tweets and put it in a form or internet page and put it out? At some point there's diminishing returns there. How do you find the good stuff? How do you write about the good stuff? How do you build it? How do you put it in a format that's better than anyone else? It's a tough competition out there. But simply offering yourself for free in order to get started otherwise, otherwise you're nowhere, and you can insist on going somewhere where there's some level of pay, but that might not be the best start for you. That might not be your fastest way to the top.
Yeah. How did you identify sports, the business of sports, as your niche to break into the sports industry? I mean, this goes back to before Fox, FoxSports.com. You hosted a college radio show devoted to sports business. Had there ever been programming of that nature when you started that?
So there was a sports. So basically, what happened was I didn't know. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I was reading the sports pages and the business pages the same. So I was reading the green page of USA Today, the money section, as much as I was reading the sports section. And I said, well, there's got to be a way to combine it. So I was thinking about that in around 1997. And in 98, that was the year Sports Business Journal came out. And I was at Northwestern, which was the largest student-run radio station in the country. I was on my way to becoming sports director there. I had some pull. And I said to myself, well, what happens if I start a sports business radio show? And I quickly learned that athletes don't want to talk to you, but everyone's trying to talk to them, and people in the business will talk forever. I mean, you can ask Drew Rosenhaus one question and your radio show is over. So I just started having all these shows. And so I built this sports business radio show. I started out with an episode, I recall, about all these energy bars and Power Bar and Cliff Bar, and I got all the founders on the show, all the CEOs, and we talked about it, and I tried it live on air, and I said, this is ridiculous. No one's doing this. Next week, Ray Rhodes gets fired from the Packers, and there's some news about Jesse Jackson. Is unhappy about it, and he thinks it has to do with him being African American in white Green Bay. Put in a call to Jesse Jackson, and then I'm talking to Jesse Jackson. So, it became like shooting fish in a barrel. And I was like, well, not only do I feel that obviously I don't have enough competition here, I'm loving this. Sports Business Journal is coming up. There's no one nationally who's doing this. And so I started to work for free. I worked for Fox Sports Media Relations for a summer to learn the media side. I went to foxsports.com to build that sports business page. And then ESPN showed up on campus and was looking for some sort of intern. And I said, just give me 10 minutes. And I said, you need a sports business reporter. Luckily, it was not an HR person because I would not have gotten the job. It was a guy named David Albright, who was a senior executive. And he said, why, and prove it. And for a while, for about a year and a half, I had gotten some blowback, including from my parents. Although they were supportive, they didn't get the business of sports, and it really wasn't a big journalism form, minus the Richard Sandomirs and Angelo Bruscas at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer and Dick Alm at Dallas Morning News. Most of these guys were on the concrete beat, which is if there was a stadium being built, then that was that's why they had that job. And I had printed out the front page of ESPN.com that day, and there were $3 signs in the 7 headlines. And I said, these are all AP stories. They're all written by the Associated Press, which you pay for, but ESPN's the worldwide leader in sports, and I don't understand why that's acceptable. If you have a dollar sign in an article, that should be written by an ESPN person. And I had taught myself all the history of business of sports. So the fact that I was 21, didn't mean I didn't know about Bill Veeck and everything. I read every book on the business of sports, and they gave me a shot. And 7 days after I graduated, I was at ESPN, and 30 days after, I was sitting next to Kenny Mean on SportsCenter for something.
Wow. I mean, that's an incredible act of courage. I mean, you were interviewed. I love this story. You were interviewed for a specific job at ESPN, and you turned the interview on its head. You could have cratered your job prospects if that idea didn't fly. Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know if I thought that I wasn't going to get the job, but like that I was definitely getting this job. But I had a couple backup plans, but and I also prepared for it. I had an 8-page laminated media guide so that David Albright could then bring this back to ESPN and say, at least this guy is over the top. Because I always said if I'm not going to believe in myself, no one will. And people could look at it today, and I look at it, and some of it is, you could say, oh, this is arrogant, but again, you have to be your own cheerleader. And, so it's a combination of luck. I think the luck part of it, upon reading Outliers and Malcolm Gladwell, that's really where it struck home. That not only did I foresee sports business as something that people would want to talk about, not only want to talk about, but you can't be a fan anymore. You can't win at the water cooler if you don't know your owner's capacity to spend and salary caps, base your compensation. I mean, in the early 90s, people would get on the radio and propose these ridiculous trades that wouldn't work, that couldn't work. Fans are now smarter. And I'd like to think that I've helped some fans be smarter along the way over the last 17 years. But, I really think that it's been really gratifying over the past almost 2 decades doing this thing, and just to see how much smarter fans have become.
Yeah, that's interesting. I completely agree that that's changed, and even the way that you see it being written about has completely changed as well. Dan and I obviously cover more of the intersection of law and sports, which I think intersects with the sports and business as well. But do you think that you're seeing somewhat of a similar shift, especially in the wake of Deflategate, when everyone was so hungry for information about the legal process, of a demand for the intersection of law and sports information?
Yeah, I do think that, as it seems like there's people who don't understand something, and as people at the top, the people who are the columnists, or the people who are covering news in Boston, or the people who are covering the national level, clearly, don't understand things. I think what happened was, where I think guys like you became important, was that people didn't understand when the whole thing turned on its head and it stopped becoming about Tom Brady, and it was more about the powers that the union apparently gave Roger Goodell, and that it was about something greater. And so people kept talking about it's Deflategate, it's dumb, it's, this is not. Whereas that was, as you guys know, that actually, it wasn't the story about the footballs after a while. It was about setting a legal precedent, and what was given by the union to the NFL, to Roger Goodell as powers when they signed the collective bargaining agreement. And so I feel like, you guys have done a lot. I feel like Michael McCann's done a lot. And certainly there is that need. There is definitely that need that fans want more. Now, do they want like the dry law? Do they want, right, do they want to read? They still don't want to read through a lawsuit, but they do want to understand. They do want to understand, and I think fans are now uncomfortable when they don't, because they're talking so much. If something's going on for 2 years, like Deflategate, if you're in New England, you have to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of strange when you come across lay people who start spouting, phrases like en banc rehearing. I think Dan and I need to get a notebook, a laminated notebook together, and submit the same thing to ESPN, because I am seeing an increasing demand for the coverage of the legal aspect of sports. And I don't think it's ever going to be as big as the coverage of the business side of sports, but there's a niche there that I don't think too many media outlets have sufficiently filled. I mean, SI has, Michael, writing, frequently, and they do a good job there. But with outlets like ESPN and many of the others, it's kind of transactional depending on the story. And I'm not seeing as frequent and consistent of coverage of the legal side of the sports industry.
No, I mean, I'd say, it started with the idea of, bringing on Roger Cossack when something was needed. But there is, niches. I think if you just look at the business of sports as an example, niches like Under Armour, aren't niches. Under Armour started with this moisture wicking shirt. A lot of their products even would have fit in the typical niche, and Nike didn't pay attention to them, and now they're a $5 billion company. So I think we've gone from, hey, let's bring on a legal expert to see the legal side of it, to there's certainly more need for things that are happening daily. And I do think fans want to hear about it, at least to the level that it would help them be smarter overall.
On that note, are there any sports legal related stories that you're really following closely and you think that could really, become a really big story in 2017?
I don't know, like the really big story, but the ones that I love, I mean, like, especially with, just to make it topical, with Oakley, where I think that there's going to, where I think, one of my favorite lawsuits is this Anthony Rotundi lawsuit, which is just, and by the way, I don't know if I'm as big of law geeks as you guys, probably not. I mean, Wallach over there probably, is giddy when he sees some lawsuit that I wouldn't sit in the corner and laugh at.
Euphoria.
Yeah. But I would say, there are insurance issues and law issues that I see that I think are amazing. And this Anthony Rotundi lawsuit now, given the background of what's happened with Charles Oakley, is a good one. You guys know of it? I don't know if you do, but
I was hoping you'd explain it to us. That one flew under our radar.
Okay, so and the lawyer has not really done much, which is one of the reasons it's been under the radar. I've only written about it twice, but it's the case of an ING trader who went to Madison Square Garden about 2 years ago, and the Knicks had squandered some crazy lead. I don't know if he was on the court or close to the court in terms of where his seats were. His name was Anthony Rotundi, and as the game was ending, he screamed, "Carmelo, you stink." Fairly innocuous. I guess Carmelo pointed to him. What has then, it has been alleged, happened was the security came over, took him away, charged him with trespassing, even though he allegedly did not step on the court. He wound up in jail, and as it has been alleged, Madison Square Garden then went out of its way to call his employer and tell them of their version of his conduct, which then resulted in his firing.
Wow, I did come across that. That's incredible.
Yeah, so when you talk about overbearing security and the history of this, and I don't know how many cases we've actually had of where Knicks security has alleged that someone did enough to then wind up in the precinct and been charged with an actual misdemeanor, and whether that's been true or not, given the handling of Oakley, you then have to go back. Now, this case has been going on for a year and a half. It's one of those cases where it seems like it's going on as too long for the next step. But Madison Square Garden has said that this case is frivolous, and they had every right to do what they did, and it should be tossed. And it's been a year and a half, and it still hasn't been answered whether the case is going to be dismissed. I have not further checked, and maybe you check this for me, but I've not further checked. I've spoken to the lawyer, and he has indeed said, hey, it's still active, and yes, it has not been dismissed. But I would wonder if there's additional, if what happened with Oakley serves as additional additional supporting documentation that what happened with Oakley was similar to what happened with Anthony Rotundi, and maybe that clarification, allows this thing to go to trial or then create some sort of settlement. Because firing the head of security after this suggests that this was not a singular incident and there was a pattern.
Yeah, we're gonna check that lawsuit out. I would think that there are many prior incidents, not just with Anthony Rotundi, but this is probably a pattern at Madison Square Garden going back many years. And this underscores another point: they never settle anything. Remember, they had the Dolan and Madison Square Garden had an opportunity to settle the Anuka Brown
Sanders, yeah,
right
yeah.
for $250,000. He took it to trial on principle, and he got socked with an $11 million judgment. Right. So, this lawyer is probably going to have to earn his keep because this case probably wouldn't settle. And I'm hoping beyond hope that Oakley does file a lawsuit. It sounds from some of the language and some of the statements coming out this week that that's where it may be headed.
Yeah, it doesn't. I thought once the Adam Silver meeting happened that would have been, that would have been resolved. And the only thing that seems to be resolved is the initial. You're not banning him from Madison Square Garden, but it seems like, given what Oakley has said, that the bad blood in total is not done.
Yeah, I mean, he asked for a public apology, and now we're on day 5, and right. Since Adam Silver's press release, we've heard nothing from James Dolan. So I'm looking forward to checking that court docket. I would expect to see a lawsuit filed imminently, unless there's a public apology coming up shortly, which doesn't seem like there's going to be.
Darren, before we let you go, we wanted to talk about something near and dear to your heart, and that is Northwestern men's basketball. Are they going to break the curse this year?
Well, normally there's some sort of wrath of God that takes place. In terms of, we had a player named Kevin Coble years and years ago who basically he was our star, and all of a sudden decided that he didn't like basketball and was going to graduate. And then you have John Sherna, who was our best player, who down the stretch ran into a basketball stand, the stanchion, and missed games. And so, as we were, what were we, 18-4, and everyone was writing we were in the tournament. I was wondering what kind of wrath of God would appear, and it surely has. And our leading scorer, Scotty Lindsay, gets mono. No, not flu, mono.
The freshman curse.
Where basically, you have to worry about spleen and other things, and so he misses 4 games, and we go 1-3 and beat Wisconsin ceremoniously, but still have to win a fair amount of games, at least 2 games down the stretch, some which we should win, but you never know. It's felt very strange, though, to have number 23 Maryland say that, beating us is a great win. I mean, This is not something, as someone who's been a fan of this team for 21 years, that you see. People have asked if I've enjoyed it, and the answer is during the games, I feel like I'm going to throw up. It's not enjoyable until the end, which, makes it seem horrible. But I'm hoping that this is the year it'll take a big monkey off our back. I will be in person, probably at the Big Ten tournament, and if we go to the tournament, I don't deserve to be alive if I don't show up at that game. So I'm praying. I'm very nervous. Somehow I could still spend my days working instead of, but on game days it's very difficult. It is part of my mass schedule, the Northwestern games and the times, so that I don't miss them.
Yeah, we noticed that your Twitter avatar is now a Northwestern player, so
yes.
your passion for the team definitely shines through your social media.
Yes, and all if you want to really rile me up, say I'm a bandwagon fan, and I'll come at you. That's I mean, I know people are just joking because no one's a bandwagon. If you're wearing the best thing about going to Northwestern is if you see someone in the street wearing a Northwestern hat, they had to go there or had to be a parent of a kid. It's not like Michigan where, they sell these things on the street and there's knockoffs. So it's a small community of us, and we're just and over indexing in the journalism world, obviously, which makes it seem like our fan base is bigger than it is, but it's still been fun.
I think the hiring of Chris Collins is really the turning point. And if it's not this year, which it will be, it's going to be soon. And so hopefully the program's in the right direction. I actually grew up.
Now I have to root for Marquette to be unbelievable because Coach K is 70. And it pretty much seems like either Steve Wojciechowski at Marquette or Chris Collins is his replacement.
Right.
And, so that's kind of my second team has now been Marquette because the better they do, perhaps the harder it becomes to hire Chris Collins away.
Right. I grew up in the North Chicago suburbs, and my dad's actually a high school basketball coach, and it just always amazed me, at least in the last 20 years or so, how little talent there is in the college level of basketball, given that Chicago
in the Chicago area.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, DePaul used to have a good team, but since then there's really been no powerhouses and there's just an incredible amount of high school talent in that area, and it all goes away. And so I'm hoping
it's very strange, to be able to get that Chicago market is. And it's vast. It's not just in the inner city.
Right.
Chris Collins, I think in high school, averaged like 45 points a game. I mean, he was insane. There are people. First of all, there are guys in the inner city who have the grades. There are also people in the suburbs who are pretty good. It's not like I grew up on Long Island where there is absolutely zero talent at all, and I was able to see probably the greatest player out of Long Island in 20 years, unfortunately, beat my team after he scored something like 67 points. Wally Serbiak. And I told my brother, I'm like, this guy's in the NBA, and he's like, no, he's not. And I said, yes, I watched him warm up, and just like the NBA players, if there's no hand in his face, he hits every single shot. So that I at least got to see that, but it's the Chicago. It's so weird because for Northwestern, our most common player, I think we had 7 kids from Split, Croatia over a 10-year period of time. So it was, Davor Dovancic was passing to Vedran Vukusic, and it's just after a while, it just became a joke.
Yeah. Well, I went to Miami, Ohio, so Wally World is near and dear to my heart as well. And he was an incredible college player as well, as you know.
Sweet 16.
Yeah, it was quite a run, especially for a school like that. Northwestern athletics have been in the news the past couple of years as well with, obviously the Kane Coulter unionization movement. Did you support Kane during that time and the school? And what's your stance on paying NCAA athletes?
Well, I would say I was close to it. I didn't write as much of it as I normally would have because I was close to it.
Right.
But I would say that there were a couple things that clear. And I heard I had relationships with the Northwestern players and the Northwestern athletic department. I didn't really have, I've known what Ramogi Yuma and the union side has preached for 15 years throughout my entire journalism career. The simple thing that remains is that if it were so natural for players to unionize and to be employees, why did the union have to strategically go through the freshmen first, then the sophomores, then the juniors and seniors? Well, why? It's so that they could brainwash them and get all the necessary votes by the time they got to the juniors and seniors. And my question becomes, if it were so natural of a movement, why would you have to rig it that way? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I understand what they were doing with Northwestern, the private institution, and how private is different from public. But there becomes a problem in that when you're trying to say, are these guys employees, it is not as natural and not as much of a slam dunk to call these guys employees versus virtually any other school. These guys actually really do go to class.
Yeah.
So the split makes it from that standpoint, it makes it more challenging. I mean, in some schools, I'm sure you could prove that 97% of the time these guys are athletes. You're not going to do that at Northwestern. And Kane made the case that he wanted to do pre-med or whatever, and they couldn't do it. And then there's just other things that bothered me. one of the main parts of the case was that, Northwestern didn't pay for Coulter after he left, his medical bills or whatever. That was one of and then it comes out that they didn't pay for a medical bill because he never told them he went to the doctor. So I maybe I'm too close to it, but I spoke to a lot of players. And the union made it seem like this was going to be a battle of the players versus the NCAA, and what it really was the players versus Northwestern. And I think a lot of people didn't want to do it. Certainly became awkward when Fitzgerald, the head football coach, couldn't really talk and other things. But and on to the should athletes get paid. I do believe that athletes should be freely marketed. They can market themselves to the hilt. I do think they should get share of their jersey sales. I don't think there's any system where it will work out for them to get paid, as long as, and of course, people say that this is, just an excuse for the system. But as long as the system exists where they're propping up every other sport, people also say, well, you're now building in advantages. Some booster's going to say, I'm going to buy 10,000 jerseys, and then all of a sudden someone's going to show up at a school. Well, let's not pretend that those advantages don't exist already. They do. Maybe it'll be a little bit more exacerbated, but I think, the jerseys, these schools are saying what numbers these guys have. Nike and Adidas are making them specifically. They're now walking away from that and just doing years like 16 and 17. That's not what the fans want. Give them what the fans want. Give them their names on the back and pay them.
Yeah, Darren, before we let you go, we do. I've always wanted to ask you about the impact that gambling is going to have on the sports industry. We're heading towards a point at which, betting on sporting events will become, part of the national, culture. It could be, a couple of years, could be even sooner, depending on a court case. How do you see this changing the business of sports and the industry generally? I mean, because it's going to happen soon.
I think it's inevitable. I think I think the idea that, it's evil and will cause more evil and will cause more, just people in reprehensible behavior. I think that's kind of moving away, and that this activity is happening anyway. And the idea for the leagues that, monitoring this is better than not, since it's already happening. The question for me is going to become, how much in the face are we going to have? Having been to England many times and seeing these betting shops, seeing betting kiosks in arenas and stadiums, yes, you will in the next 5 years be able to legally place bets outside, the states that currently have it, outside Nevada or an Indian reservation or something else. But how will that actually manifest itself, and how far will the sports world be willing to go? That's pretty much the question for me. But systems have been built, even through daily fantasy, where you could see the power that this will have, and the revenue that it will help create, and perhaps maybe reverse the cycle of the millennial and I'm not saying kids who are 10 are going to bet, but just help the consumption of overall media, which is kind of killing things, in terms of, we always thought everyone was going to watch sports live and in entirety. And obviously for the millennials, that's proven not to be the case. So I think as Adam Silver has kind of suggested, gambling helps create more overall interest, and that's something that the leagues want.
Yeah, will the decline in the NFL's TV ratings, if it continues another year, soften the NFL's longstanding opposition to gambling?
I think maybe. I think you can clearly say that the people who hang in games now there's a large component of fantasy football that's involved. Although again, there's the people are getting their data, and then the data is good enough, and you don't have to see it. I think the NFL has a lot to work on, including how they want the advertisements to go, the whole kickoff ad, return ad. I think they really are clear that there's only 12 minutes of total action in an NFL game, and I think that they're in that sense they're one of the sports that gets hurt in a society that's looking to go and see everything. So I think the NFL is, forget about gambling, is just challenged to stay on top by evolving their product a little bit, and to be able to make it more palatable so that they can actually compete for the mind share of some of these kids.
Well, Darren, thanks so much for coming on. That was a lot of fun to get to talk to you and hear your takes on this. Obviously everyone already follows you on Twitter, so we maybe didn't even say your Twitter handle, but it's at Darren Ravel. Check him out on ESPN.com.
Not everyone. Katy Perry has many more followers.
Okay.
Well, maybe we could give you the conduct detrimental bump to your list of followers.
There you go.
Well,
thanks, guys. I think you guys do a great job. I obviously look at what you do, and it helps me too, because as someone who always feels like I need to be on the ball. Seeing some of the stuff that comes out of your feeds, clearly makes me get to something faster because I can see it at the ground floor. I mean, that's what Twitter's been great. I mean, we've talked about Twitter as an output medium, but really, being able to find what the next story is, you have to find out what the first part of the story is to write the business of it. So, you guys have kind of put out, whether it's a raw lawsuit or, something else, it allows me to see it faster and then act on it faster and be a better reporter. So thank you guys as well.
Well, we've learned a lot from you too, and certainly on how to use Twitter. You've really been a guiding light to me personally, and I look forward to continuing to follow you. And congratulations on re-upping with ESPN. We look forward to seeing so much more of you in the years ahead, and of course, I look forward to interacting with you going forward. So, thanks for doing us a solid and jumping on Conduct Detrimental. It was really enjoyable, and we loved having you.
All right, let's end this love fest. Thanks to Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Darren.
Okay.
Thank you.